The man in the brown work jacket did not look like someone who was about to change anything. That was probably why no one paid him much attention when he walked through the glass doors of the Aldermore Group's downtown Edmonton office on a Tuesday morning in late October. A manila folder tucked under one arm and a thermos of coffee in the other hand. He was 43 years old. He had grease under two of his fingernails that he had not been able to scrub out completely. He had driven 40 minutes in the dark to get there. His name was Kevin Shaughnessy, and he had not slept well in 4 days. The lobby of the Aldermore Group was the kind of space designed to make people feel small before they even open their mouths. Marble floors the color of old bone, ceilings that went up 3 stories, a reception desk that looked like it had been carved out of a single piece of dark wood, staffed by a young woman in a blazer who had the practiced expression of someone who had turned away a great many people without ever raising her voice. Kevin walked up to the desk and set his thermos down carefully on the counter. He had done this before, in smaller offices, with smaller men behind smaller desks. He knew how to carry himself when he was being looked at like a problem that hadn't been solved yet. "I'm here to submit documents under the Municipal Infrastructure Review Agreement," he said. "Reference number 7741C. I'd like them received and logged today." The receptionist looked at him the way people look at a weather forecast they don't believe. She asked if he had an appointment. He said he did not need one for document submission under that agreement. He said this quietly, without emphasis, because he had read the agreement 17 times, and he knew exactly what it said. She told him to wait. He waited. He had been waiting, in one form or another, for 11 months. Kevin Shaughnessy had grown up in Fort Saskatchewan, the second of 3 kids in a house where nothing was replaced until it broke completely, and sometimes not even then. His father had been a millwright at the refinery for 31 years. His mother had worked dispatch for a trucking company. They were people who understood how things worked. Machines, systems, the gap between what was promised and what was delivered, and they had raised Kevin to understand those things too. He had become an industrial mechanic at 22, certified and good at it, the kind of technician who could hear something wrong in an engine before the diagnostic said so. He had worked for 3 different companies over 20 years, moved up, earned a decent reputation in the trade. He was not a man with enemies. He was not a man who looked for trouble. He had met Diane at a curling bonspiel in Leduc when he was 28. She was a nurse, precise and funny, and completely unimpressed by anything that didn't earn her respect honestly. They had a daughter together, Abby, born in 2014. Abby had Diane's eyes and Kevin's stubbornness and a laugh that could fill a room. Diane died of an aggressive cancer in January 2021. She was 38 years old. She had been sick for 14 months and had worked until she physically could not anymore. Because that was the kind of person she was, and Kevin had held her hand through all of it, and then afterward he had gone home to a 7-year-old who didn't fully understand yet, and he had made breakfast and gotten Abby dressed for school and driven her there without crying until he was back in the truck by himself with the radio off. He didn't tell that part of the story often. It wasn't the kind of thing that fit easily into conversation. What mattered, for the purpose of understanding what happened at the Aldermore Group, was this: Kevin Shaughnessy was a man who had already survived something that should have broken him, and so when he found what he found at the Whitmore Road maintenance facility in December of the previous year, he was not afraid of what it might cost him to do something about it. He had been hired by Aldermore Group through a subcontract in the spring, part of a city-funded infrastructure project covering several aging stormwater management facilities in the south end of Edmonton. The project was large, over $32 million of public money, and the Aldermore Group had won the contract through a competitive tender process that, on paper, looked entirely above board. Kevin's job was installation and calibration of mechanical systems at 3 of the sites. It was the kind of work he had done many times. He was good at it. He showed up early and left late and did not cut corners, because he was constitutionally incapable of it. It was at the Whitmore Road site, in the third week of December, that he noticed the discrepancy. The drainage pipe casings that had been installed along the primary retention channel were not the grade specified in the engineering documents. Kevin knew this because he had been working around those specifications for weeks, and because he had run his hands along those casings, the way a person runs their hands along something that doesn't feel right, and because he had then looked up the manufacturer codes stamped into the material and compared them against what the contract required. The material that was in the ground was rated for a significantly lower pressure tolerance than what was specified. In a typical year, it wouldn't matter. In a heavy melt year, or a major rainfall event of the kind that had become more common in Alberta over the past decade, it could fail. When it failed, it would fail fast, and the area downstream, which included a school and a residential neighborhood, would flood. Kevin brought this to his immediate supervisor, a project manager named Gary, who worked directly for one of Aldermore's subsidiary contractors. Gary listened, nodded, told Kevin he'd look into it, and then 3 days later told Kevin there had been a review and everything was within acceptable parameters. Kevin asked to see the review. Gary told him it wasn't his place to ask for that. Kevin went home that night and sat at the kitchen table after Abby was in bed, and he opened his laptop and he began to read the Municipal Infrastructure Review Agreement that governed projects of this type in the city of Edmonton. He read it for 4 hours. He found the clause that gave independent tradespeople the right to submit documented concerns directly to the city's infrastructure office, with mandatory logging and a required response timeline. He read it twice more to make sure he understood it correctly. Then he made himself a cup of tea, checked on Abby, and went to bed. Over the next 3 months, Kevin did something that required a particular kind of patience, not the passive kind, not the kind that just sits and waits and hopes, but the active kind, the kind that moves carefully through a system, gathering what it needs, not because it is angry, but because it knows the difference between being right and being able to prove it. He documented everything. He photographed the casings with timestamps. He pulled the original tender documents from the city's public procurement database. He obtained the manufacturer's pressure rating specifications directly from the supplier. He hired on his own a retired civil engineer named Alan, who had worked for the province for 30 years and who owed nobody in this city any favors. Alan looked at what Kevin had assembled and said, clearly and in writing, that the installed material did not meet the contract specification and represented a genuine risk in extreme weather conditions. Kevin paid Alan out of money he had set aside for Abby's dental work. He made a note to pick up extra shifts in the spring. In February, Gary called Kevin and told him his services on the project were no longer required. No formal reason was given. Kevin was told his work had been satisfactory, but that the project timeline had shifted and his phase of the work was complete. He was handed his final payment and his paperwork and shown to the door of the site trailer in the way that is designed to communicate that the conversation is over. Kevin drove home in the late afternoon gray of an Edmonton February, Abby asleep in the back seat because he had picked her up from his mother's place on the way. And he looked in the rearview mirror at her small face against the window, and he thought about what Diane would have said. Diane would have told him to finish what he started. He had 3 months of documentation. He had an engineer's written assessment. He had the original contract specifications. He had highlighted in the review agreement he had printed and annotated the exact subsection that governed his right to submit. What he did not have was any illusion that this was going to be easy. The woman at the Aldermore Group reception desk came back after 12 minutes and told Kevin that the company's legal office had indicated that his submission could not be received at this location, that document submissions of this nature were to be directed through the project management system, and that she was going to have to ask him to leave. Kevin looked at her. He was not surprised. He had expected something like this. He had prepared for something like this. He said calmly that the Municipal Infrastructure Review Agreement, Section 4.2 by, specifically required that document submissions under this clause be received and logged at the business address of the primary contract holder within the city. He said that this was the Aldermore Group's registered business address. He said he was not leaving until the documents had been received and his submission had been logged with a date and timestamp. The receptionist's expression shifted by about 3 millimeters in the direction of discomfort. She excused herself again. Kevin picked up his thermos and took a slow drink of coffee and looked at the marble floor and thought about Abby, who was at school right now, and who had asked him that morning if he could come. Watch her read in class on Thursday. He had said yes. He intended to keep that. When the receptionist came back, she was not alone. There was a man with her, mid-50s, the kind of suit that costs more than Kevin's truck payment, silver at the temples, and a face that had learned to express confidence so automatically it no longer required effort. His name, Kevin would learn later, was Philip Dressler, and he was the Aldermore Group's executive vice president of operations, which meant he was not a man who typically came down to reception to deal with people like Kevin. The fact that he had came down told Kevin something. Philip Dressler looked at Kevin the way a man looks at a minor inconvenience he has already decided how to handle. He did not extend his hand. He said that he understood Kevin had some concerns, and that Aldermore Group took all employee feedback seriously, and that the appropriate channel for Kevin's submission was through the project management portal, which Kevin could access via the contractor relations page on their website. Kevin listened to all of this. Then he said, again, that he was not a former employee raising a performance concern. He was a certified tradesperson submitting documentation under a mandatory review clause in a city-authorized infrastructure agreement. He said the distinction was important. He said he had brought 2 copies of everything, one to leave here and one for his records. Dressler's expression did not change. He told Kevin, pleasantly and with absolute certainty, that this was private property, and that Kevin was not authorized to be here. He said Kevin could submit his concerns through the web portal or through his former project manager, and that if he did not leave voluntarily, he would be asked to leave by security. Kevin said he understood. He placed his folder on the reception counter. He placed it face up, with his name and the reference number clearly visible. He placed his business card on top of it. He placed his government-issued identification next to that, clearly visible, and then stepped back so that everything could be seen by anyone in the lobby who happened to be looking. Several people were looking. Kevin said he would wait while the documents were logged. Dressler smiled. It was the smile of a man who has never lost a situation like this and sees no reason to believe today will be different. He stepped to the side and said something quietly to the receptionist, and then he took out his phone and made a call, and Kevin stood with his hands in his pockets and waited. The security guard who arrived was young and looked faintly apologetic about all of it. He told Kevin he needed to leave. Kevin said, to the guard and to no one in particular, that he was leaving the documents on the counter, that they were submitted under reference 7741C, and that he was noting the time as 11:22 in the morning, which he would include in his follow-up correspondence to the city's infrastructure office, the Alberta Municipal Affairs Review Board, and the project auditors, whose contact information he had obtained 3 weeks ago. He picked up his thermos. He picked up his identification. He left the folder on the counter. As Kevin walked toward the door, he heard Philip Dressler laugh. It was a short laugh, the kind that is meant to be heard, the kind that communicates amusement at the idea that any of this was going to matter. Kevin heard it. He kept walking. He had expected that too. What Philip Dressler did not know, what the Aldermore Group's legal team did not know, what Gary and the project manager and everyone else in that building did not know, was that Kevin had made one phone call 6 weeks before that morning. He had not made it in anger. He had not made it as a threat. He had made it the way he did everything. Carefully, after reading everything he needed to read, after confirming that the person on the other end was exactly who they said they were. The person on the other end was a woman named Beatrice Okafor, who worked as a senior analyst in the City of Edmonton's Infrastructure Accountability Office, a branch of municipal government that had been created specifically in response to a construction scandal 4 years earlier, and was staffed by people who were, professionally speaking, looking for exactly the kind of thing Kevin had brought them. Kevin had sent Beatrice Okafor a package by courier, physical copies, not digital, the engineer's report, the specification comparisons, the photographic documentation with timestamps, the relevant sections of the procurement agreement highlighted in yellow, a one-page cover letter written in the plainest language he could manage, which described, without editorializing, what he had found, what the potential consequence was, and why he believed it was a matter of public safety rather than an internal contractor dispute. Beatrice Okafor had acknowledged receipt within 48 hours. She had asked 2 clarifying questions, which Kevin had answered by email. She had then said, in the careful language of a person who cannot make promises but is indicating direction, that the office would be reviewing the matter carefully. Kevin had said thank you, and then he had gone to pick up Abby from her after-school program, and they had stopped for pho on the way home because Abby loved pho, and Kevin had listened to her talk about a project she was doing on migratory birds for the entire drive without checking his phone once. The city's Infrastructure Accountability Office opened a formal investigation 6 weeks after Kevin's call. This was not, in the scope of these things, a long time. The investigation was not announced publicly. These things rarely are, at first. The office sent 2 auditors to the Whitmore Road site. They brought their own measurement tools. They pulled records from the city's project management database, the same database through which Aldermore Group had submitted their progress reports and material certifications. Those certifications said one thing. The material in the ground said another. When the auditors matched Kevin's documentation against the site records, they found that the discrepancy was not limited to Whitmore Road. There were 2 other sites. The total under-specification across all 3 locations involved infrastructure that was rated for substantially lower load tolerance than what the contract required. The cost difference between the specified material and the installed material, the amount Aldermore had effectively saved by substituting, was later calculated at just over $400,000. On a $32 million contract funded by public money, $400,000 that had been invoiced to the city at the rate of the correct, more expensive material and pocketed as the difference. This was not, legally speaking, merely a construction defect. This was fraud. Kevin found out about the expanded investigation the same way most people found out about things like this, not from the people involved, but from a quiet notification. In his case, a brief email from Beatrice Okafor that said the office's review had broadened in scope and that his original documentation had been formally entered into the record as the initiating submission. He read that email at 6:30 in the morning, standing at the kitchen counter in his socks while the kettle boiled. He read it twice. He put his phone face down on the counter and finished making Abby's lunch for school. A cheese sandwich, a clementine, a small bag of crackers, and a note that said good luck on the bird project, it's going to be great, and then he went and woke her up. Philip Dressler was removed from his position at the Aldermore Group in the spring, 4 months after Kevin's visit to the lobby. The company's board moved quickly once the investigation became public record, in the way that boards move quickly when they need the public to understand that the problem was a person and not a system. This was not entirely true, and several people knew it, and some of those people would eventually have to answer for it in a process that would take another 1.5 years to complete. The city halted payment on the remaining portion of the Aldermore contract, the remediation work, Removing and replacing the underspecified casings at all 3 sites was estimated at just under $2 million. The bill was directed to the Aldermore Group. Their insurer contested it. There would be litigation. None of that was Kevin's problem. On the Thursday after he had gotten Beatrice Okafor's email, Kevin went to Abby's school and sat in a small chair at the back of her classroom and watched her stand at the front of the room and read from her project about Arctic terns, which, she explained to her classmates, flew from the top of the world to the bottom of the world and back again every year, the longest migration of any animal on Earth, and somehow always found their way home. The other kids listened. A few of them looked genuinely interested. Kevin sat in his small chair and watched his daughter's face while she talked about these birds. The certainty in her voice, the way she held her pepper without hiding behind it, and he thought about Diane the way he always did when Abby did something that made him proud, which was often. After the presentation, Abby's teacher, a woman named Mrs. Fontaine, who had been teaching grade 4 for 20 years and had a gift for paying attention to which kids needed steadying, stopped Kevin in the hallway. She said Abby had been doing well. She said she had noticed, over the past few months, that Abby seemed settled, more confident. Kevin thanked her. He didn't say much more than that. He drove Abby home. She asked if they could stop for Theo again, and he said yes. She talked the whole way about Arctic terns, and Kevin kept the radio off and listened. The story does not end in a courtroom, though the courtroom would come in time. It does not end with a single dramatic moment, though there had been one of those, in a marble lobby, with a laughing man and a folder left on a counter. Those things happened. They were real. But the part that Kevin came back to, the part he thought about when the nights were quiet and Abby was asleep, and the house was just a house with the 2 of them in it, was simpler than any of that. He had found something wrong. He had learned what could be done about it. He had done it carefully, without anyone to tell him it was going to work, without any guarantee that it would. He had kept his daughter's lunch made, and her school forms signed, and her dentist appointments kept. He had done both things at once, the way people do when they don't have the option of doing only one. The Aldermore Group's name was still on 3 buildings in Edmonton. The empire did not vanish. These things rarely do. But the contract was gone. The investigation was on record. The material in the ground was being replaced, and a school in the south end of the city was not going to flood because a man in a suit had calculated that no one would notice. Someone had noticed. Kevin Shaughnessy had noticed, and he had known what to do with that, and he had done it. That was the whole of it. That was enough.